It is 12 p.m. We're going to go ahead and get started. Phrase that I like to use here at IASB is don't punish the punctual. So we're going to get started. And this webinar will be recorded. It'll be available for later viewing, or if someone missed the webinar, it will be recorded. So if our tech admin can start the recording now, I'd appreciate that. I'll wait for that to kick in, and then we'll start the webinar. All right, we are recording. Well, welcome everyone. I am D.T. Magee, Executive Director for the Iowa Association of School Boards, and I am thrilled today to have Cindy Yelick here. Cindy is the Chief Administrator for Heartland AEA, and for a lot of items at the state level, she serves as a representative for all of the AEA chiefs. She is a seasoned education leader in Iowa and an expert in AEA funding and finance. And so welcome, Cindy.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining me. We've got a series of slides we're going to talk about today that outline different components of House File 2612 and their impact on funding and AEA staffing. I really would welcome questions throughout. DT said he would help moderate, so if you post a question in the chat, he can stop me and ask that question, and then we'll then move on. So feel free to post questions as they become pertinent and important to you during the presentation.
And thank you, Cindy. Just a background for how we arrived here at this webinar today. Cindy and I were in a meeting, and I asked two questions. And this goes back to my time I served as a superintendent for 7 years. And that was basically when the AEA runs short of funds, if funding flowing from local school districts doesn't fill their bucket completely, how does AEA funding work? And then how do AEAs make up funding shortfalls? So that was the background that led us to today. So just appreciate you being here again, Cindy. And I'm going to step back and take over, and then I will interject as questions come up.
All right, thanks so much. So as many of you know, we have a changing landscape actually with AEA funding in general, and today we're going to talk more specifically about special education funding. But just to review, the House File 2612 and the implications on funding. House File 2612 was passed during the legislative session in 2024, and it's had a 2-year implementation. It will be fully implemented in starting July 1 of 25. So the things to remember is that AEAs have historically been funded on 3 funding areas. They were educational services, media services, and special education services. 100% of the dollars that were generated from the formulas for educational services and media services will go directly to a district's general fund now. Those formulas that were used to generate educational services and media services included all students that were enrolled in a public school and an accredited non-public school or a charter school. And 100% of those funds then will go to, if the students are in a public school, they will go to the district's general fund. And if they are in an accredited non-public school, those will actually sit in an account, and an AEA will serve as the fiscal agent for those funds and help accredited non-public school draw down those services. There are no restrictions on the use of those educational services and media dollars. So in the general fund, a district can prioritize what needs they have around that and spend those accordingly. 100% of special education dollars now will also flow to districts. So if you are a current school board member, you might remember that when you would get your district's budget, there was a line item that just went automatically to the AEA. Now, 100% of those funds will go to your district. 90% of those special education dollars must be spent with your AEA to provide special education services for students in your district. 10% of those special education dollars can be retained in the district, and they may be used to support any district identified special education need or priority. So it's really important to remember that the special education dollars can only be spent on special education needs, or what is an allowable expense for special education, while those dollars that were in education services and media go to the general fund, and so those are not restricted. So any questions so far, DT?
No questions yet.
Okay. So what's important to remember with House File 2612 is that it outlined what we just talked about, the flow of money for education services and media services and special education. At the end of each session, the legislature then enacts or adopts their budget, and then they vote on their budget bill. That is where there's a major part of funding for the AEAs that is impacted. So this legislative session, in that final budget bill, the AEAs were de-appropriated $32.5 million. For those of you that are wondering, $325 million would be about the equivalent of 325 staff across the state. So the way the funding works now, though, because those dollars go to the district and they then have to spend 90% with the AEA, what happens now is that $32.5 million is going to get de-appropriated or reduced from that overall bucket that's going to be distributed to the districts. And then 90% of what's left is then going to flow back to the AEA. And I think there's been quite a bit of confusion. That de-appropriation at the end of the session impacts special education service dollars because EdServ and media dollars are handled through levies. So I think it's really important to understand now, anytime the legislature de-appropriates the AEA, that is actually a reduction in the funds that will go to the districts. And then 90% of that reduced amount would come back to your AEA to provide for services.
Cindy, we have a question in the chat.
Mhm.
Says, what function do we code our flow through dollars to? Currently, it is line 35 of the budget, AEA support direct to AEA.
So as far as the budget code, they were, I know Cassandra Klein at the department was working through guidance on specifically how that's going to get coded. So DT, I think it's something we could send back out to attorneys once we get that clarification.
We will get that information out, whether it's encouraging the department to do that through the AEA and or ISB.
Thanks.
Another question.
Sure.
If you want
Whoops.
to stay back on that slide, if we have a 2080 agreement for special ed director with the AEA, can that payment come out of the 90% or does it have to come out of the 10%?
So for a shared special education director, that would come out of your 10% of those special education dollars. So when there has been some confusion on this, just generally a way to think about it, and we are going to have a slide in just a couple slides that talks a little bit about AEA responsibilities for the special education service dollars, but something that is available to all districts, those come out of your 90%. If you're a district that has chosen to do something such as purchase shared special education director, a shared social worker to work with special education students, that would be part of your 10% discretionary money. Or you could also, in theory, tap your regular special education dollars that sit outside of your AEA agreement.
So, Cindy, real quick, just about that de-appropriation. Can you speak to how in past years the AEAs have planned for that de-appropriation? So that is now moving over to the district side. And with budgets being due in April, the de-appropriation usually occurs after budgets are due. So how have the AEAs historically handled that budgeting process, and how might LEAs want to mirror those practices?
Right. So the AEAs actually have a little bit earlier timeline on submitting our budget. And what we have always done is we base our budget on 0% SSA, and we base it on the de-appropriation from the previous session. So this $32.5 million that we were deappropriated for 2020 or for fiscal year 26, that is the same number that we were deappropriated for 25. So that's what we built our budget off. But you need to know that that number does fluctuate. There is $7.5 million of it that was put into code probably almost 15 years ago. So we always know you count on a $7.5 million reduction. But then every year they make a decision, is it going to be another 7.5? So the total is 15. Last year with the 32.5, that was the biggest reduction the AEAs have seen. But we tend to base our budget on what the deappropriation the year before was.
Very good. We have two more questions. These amounts are on our A&L program summary: media services funding paid to district, educational services funding paid to district. Do we retain 100% of these dollars, and are there any restrictions on those funds?
Any of the media dollars that went historically to the AEA will be 100% of those will be retained in district now, and they are it's appropriate to use them for anything that's appropriate to expend general fund dollars on.
And then the next question, how many AEA individuals will the 32.5 million affect? And just they missed that number that you shared.
So just roughly 32.5 million would be about 325 AEA staff members across the state.
Very good. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So something that is new this year is that then each local school district has to enter into an agreement with their local AEA about how they are going to transfer the 90% of dollars. I put in the slides the link to the Department of Education FAQ on this part of the bill. So each district will enter into an agreement that they will flow 90% of their AEA special education dollars to the AEA in conjunction with state aid payment. So you take that 90% of dollars, you divide that across the 10 months, and that's the part that will flow to your AEA. So this agreement is really about the flow of the dollars, how the dollars are going to go from the district to the AEA, because this is different than historically that just happened in one chunk outside of the district entering into this agreement. So DT, looks like a couple questions have popped up, or one maybe. Or at least the chat looked like something came in.
I think we're okay.
Okay.
Those are just some comments. Yep.
All right. So one of the things that I think it's important to understand is the agreement that we've asked local boards to enter into really governs the flow of the money. It is not putting parameters around the service because there is specific language that the contract between the district and the AEA does not describe the specific special education services that the school district will receive from the AEA. The legislative intent, as we were in conversations as the legislation was being passed 2 sessions ago, was really they wanted special education to function by and large how it had been historically, so that there was some flexibility. An example I always give is we have a small district at Heartland that had a family with triplets. They needed occupational therapy time. When that family moved away, that district no longer needed that. But another district actually had some families move in. The students needed those. So we were able to move that occupational therapist from one district to another. That is one of the reasons there is not specificity around the staff that are assigned to work in these areas, so that students and districts can get what they need in time when they need a specific service. All right. So what are some things that are district responsibilities and what are AEA responsibilities? Remember that every local district already receives special education funding independent of these special education AEA dollars we're talking about today. A district is charged with providing a student's instructional portion or helping fulfill that instructional component so a student receives FAPE. So a district provides a teacher. If a student on their IEP calls for a paraprofessional or a nurse, a specialized nurse, specialized transportation, or a specialized curriculum, that is all part of the district's responsibility, and you use those special education dollars that flow directly to the district for special education. So what does an AEA provide? AEAs are charged with and responsible for what we call child find, and this is the evaluation and entitlement process for special education. So we have school psychologists, special education consultants, social workers who work with the school to evaluate a student and determine if they are eligible for special education services, and then help write that IEP that delineates what those services will look like. The AEA is also charged with providing support and related services. If a student's IEP calls for work with a speech language pathologist, a physical therapist, a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing, those things are what we call a support and related service, and an AEA is responsible for providing those at no additional charge to a district. And we're also charged with coaching and collaboration with the district to help them implement an IEP. So if a new student moves in, they have something on the IEP that a teacher or a building hasn't worked with before, our staff is responsible to help coach and help get that IEP implemented. All right. So what are more specific examples of special education staff supporting IEPs? We've talked about many of these: school psychs, social workers, and consultants. And it's important to, as we're going to move into now, how do we staff in a district, think through kind of these big overarching strands for our staff. So we have these core team staff. We have direct and related service providers. So those are the ones that are delineated on IEP, like a speech pathologist, a challenging behavior consultant. We have what we call low incidence supports. So not very many students in our state need direct work with an audiologist or a assistive technology specialist, but there are some that do, and those are delineated in the IEP, but they happen more rarely. And then we have support staff. We have regional administrators. We have data specialists who are charged with working in the statewide IEP system to just monitor and keep IEPs up to date. We have administrative assistants, obviously, who support this work. So you might wonder, how do we staff in different districts, and what has been the impact of House File 2612? So we're going to talk about two very different districts. Our first district has 500 students in it. What I've done is pulled what the 100% of special education dollars from the AEA formula would generate, then what that 10% that the district would retain, and 90% that would flow to their local AEA. So 100% of the dollars would be about 159,000. Obviously, then the district would retain 15,900 for identified needs that they have. Then they must spend 90% with their AEA, or 143,000, to staff those areas that we just talked about. The way we handle staffing is there are some things like the course team staff, those psychs, social workers, consultants. Our best metric or our best data point on how you do that is you actually look at general ed student enrollment. And the reason that is because largely that staff gets tapped for child find evaluations, that coaching and consultation. So really, the larger the district, the more kids they have totally enrolled, that drives how many staff members we need to support them. So if you look at this slide, this district with 500, their FTE for this year, they had about a day and a half a week of school psychology time, a day of school social worker, and about 4 days of almost 4 days of school consultant time or education consultant time. Then we look at what is staffed on a child's IEP. They needed about a half-time speech language pathologist to cover the IEP minutes that were needed. They had less, not even a half a day a week, of a challenging behavior person who was working specifically with a student who had a goal in that area. And then they had an occupational therapist and a physical therapist staffed in for a very small amount of time. So this district had about 1.9 staff assigned to them this year. And for next year, as we look at the needs in that district, and then we look at what the budget now with the reductions can support, they will have 1.75 or 1.75 total staff assigned to them in these areas. Then when we look at those low incident staff that we talked about, audiology, assistive tech, those kinds of things, those we don't assign kind of generally based on student enrollment. We assign those specifically by pulling individual IEPs and saying, here's how many minutes they need in this district to support audiology or assistive technology. And then you see what the staffing levels are based on those actual IEPs. So this district, they would have had 1.75 assigned kind of into that consulting group, 1.05 for low incidence needs based on IEPs, so 2.8. If you run the math on that, 2.8 staff members cost about $302,000, 302,400. And if we go back to that slide from above, you see that that district is actually not generating $302,000. They actually generate totally about 159,000, and then we're backing their 10% out. So you say, well, then how are we making this work if a district is not, their 90% does not cover the cost? And this is where federal special education dollars come in. So federal special education dollars close the gap between what will be generated by the formula and what it's going to actually take to staff a district.
And that was a key answer to one of my original questions when Cindy and I talked about this, is how do you make up that budget shortfall in these type of dynamics? And I think that's a key point for people to take away today is, Cindy, repeat that again. How do you cover that gap between what a district receives in funding versus what it costs the AEAs to provide staff and services?
Right. So at this point, what's going to need to happen is any federal special education dollars that come to the AEA, and there are some that come directly, they are going to have to be used to bridge this gap. Historically, we've been able to do other things such as use EdServ and media dollars, reserves, those kinds of things. But because how the constraints now have happened around the money, it's going to have to be federal dollars that close any gap that we have.
Very good. We do have a couple questions.
Mm-hmm.
So the contract has been shared with us from the AEA for monthly payments. This will cause my district to change our current accounts payable practices, or payments to the AEA will be late per the agreement. While payments can be made monthly, the terms in the contract do not fit my district's current AP schedule, and the AEA is not wanting to amend their contract to accommodate my current payment schedule. Thoughts on that?
So it depends a little bit on, we've had a couple districts reach out that the contract calls for ACH, transfer of funds. So we've worked with districts individually about those. We've had some districts ask about the way their process is set up on some months. If it falls close to a holiday, then the payment will be late. And we've worked with that district to say, you know, if it's a month or two where that impacts, what's your schedule and how does that line up? So we have worked with districts individually. I would say if it's just, and I don't know which AEA you're in, but if it's just that your schedule is out of sequence, the way that this contract was set up in conjunction with one of the law firms and then the Department of Education will review, is that it flows in conjunction with those state aid payments. So without knowing further detail, I would say the expectation is that they flow in conjunction with those state aid payments.
Very good. Next question. If a deaf interpreter is not available from the AEA, is the AEA responsible to reimburse the district for that cost?
Um, uh, Depending on the student's IEP, a deaf interpreter can be actually the responsibility of the district, because that's considered an instructional. That's an instructional part of the student's IEP. Some AEAs have had deaf interpreters that either districts could contract with or provided, but that is considered an instructional component
So district cost.
at district
And
cost.
then,
Sorry.
yep, next question. You said the federal special education dollars that will fill the gap will be paid directly to the AEA. Is that correct?
So it's not that. It is that there are federal dollars that come to the AEA to provide certain services, and that's what we're going to have to use to fill the gap. And yes, those come directly to the AEA. But it is not a situation where they say, what is the gap and how much money do you need? It is a static or flat budget, so we are going to have to work within our new parameters to make sure that staff and schools are getting what they need in special education.
Good. those are the questions. Thank you.
Okay. We're going to walk through a very similar scenario then for a large district with 13,000 students. I'll just hit the highlight and kind of the bottom line then to show you how the math works also for a large district. So their special education funds will generate over $4 million. The 90% that will flow to the AEA is about 3.7. So you can see the scope of the staffing. The staff is assigned the same way where we look at gen ed population, we look at specific minutes on IEPs. They had historically had about just over 47 staff assigned to them. Next year, as we try to take in some of the budget reduction, which is where in that consultative staff, psychologists, social workers, and consultants, that's where we would maybe have a little more latitude. They will be reduced, just under 1 FTE that's assigned to that district. But I think this is what's important to understand is that their staffing cost for this district for an AEA is $5.2 million. And if you go back, if we can go back to that slide, even in a large district, their 90% does not generate enough funding to cover the staffing in that AEA. And this has been a huge, I think, misunderstanding is that when we had dollars that were generated from the formula for both EdServe and media and special education, larger districts said it's unfair that our dollars are supporting smaller districts to get what they need. And in the case of education services and media services, because the system was set up as a pooled system, there were districts that drew down more or less proportionally than what their flow through dollars generated. But in the area of special education, there is no district whose dollars totally support their needs without us having to backfill from some of the federal dollars. So with that, any other questions or comments for today?
Got another question. What will happen if you don't get the federal funding?
So right now, the way the federal funds work is that the Iowa Department of Education has a plan that is approved by the federal government or the federal U.S. Department of Education. If they choose not to flow those funds, that is going to mean that our Department of Education is going to have to write another plan, and it will, if there was no federal funding available, because districts receive some federal funding as well, it will significantly change, even more so than this House File 2612 has. It's going to significantly impact provision of special education services to students.
Thank you for that. Okay, we've got some more questions coming in. Do we have the account coding for AEA 90% payments? And it follows up with debit, cash, credit, question mark.
And I think that relates up to the question asked earlier, and so we can send that specific information out. Either it will come directly from the Department of Education in the FAQs, or we can follow up with IASB on that.
Do we have to do the ACH payment to the AEA? Why is that the method that was suggested?
I think for several of our districts, they already had ACH established, and it seemed that that was an easy way to get the funds transferred. But we do have districts we're working with who are sending a physical check each month. So I think if you're in a situation where either you or your board is not comfortable with ACH, then reach out to your local AEA and establish a routine that will work.
Good. Those are the questions that are in there. So we'll wait another minute or two.
Okay.
For see if there's any other questions. Cindy, if you would go forward to slide 19.
Oh, slide 19. Sorry, DT.
Yep. One more. And so just a reminder, we have the upcoming Summit on Student Success, sponsored by IASB. It's going to be at the FFA Enrichment Center next week, Wednesday, July 11th, from 9 to 3:30. And then also we've got a couple more webinars that are coming, or another webinar that's coming up, post-session legislative policy updates webinar. That's on Wednesday, June 25th from noon to 1 p.m. And then teacher compensation and benefits survey webinar. That's coming up on Tuesday, July 15th from noon to 1. Get more information at www.ia-sb.org/learning-hub. And if you'd go back to slide 18, Cindy.
Yep.
Our contact information. So feel free to reach out to Cindy or I. We may not answer your question directly. We may be able to answer your question, or we may direct it to another AEA staff member, another IASB staff member, or someone through the Department of Ed. But we appreciate everybody coming out today. And Cindy, any other wisdom for our collective group today?
I think DT, there was one more question that popped up about, is there a template for the contract that the AEA for the monthly payment? Your AEA should have sent that to your superintendent and local business manager. So if that somehow did not get to you, reach back out to your local AEA. And I think, like everything, that touches the AEA right now, this has been definitely a big change. The business offices, for those of you who work closely with our business managers, know they had to set up invoicing, reporting, billing, and then this contracted part around the 90%. It's been a heavy lift. We appreciate our partners in schools that have given us great constructive feedback, maybe on how to make things better. We appreciate your patience as we implement this change. Most importantly, though, we really appreciate everybody's continued focus on kids. We know this is a tough time, but we are keeping our eye on what's going to make a difference for kids and working through these things so we can continue to do great things in Iowa schools. So thank you for those of you supporting all kids and all learners right now.
And Cindy, on behalf of ISB and all of our members, we just want to thank you and all the AEA staff for a comment that just popped in as thank you for building the plane while flying it. And so that is so true right now. So thank you for all that you're doing to navigate through these changes that have some historical significance in the state of Iowa, and for everything you're doing to stay focused on your mission, and that is serving students in districts and staff and families at such a high level. We just appreciate everything that AEA staff members do. And by way of reminder, for those of you that may not be familiar with ISB's membership structure, we serve the boards for Iowa's 325 public school districts and our 15 community colleges and the 9 AEA boards as well. And so our AEA boards are our members, and so we just appreciate that everything they're doing. Cindy, thank you again for being here today. Thanks for sharing this update on AEA funding and how it works. Please, if anybody has additional questions, follow up with Cindy or I. We'll get those answered as quickly as possible. With that, we'll bring our webinar to a close. Have a great day, everyone. Enjoy the end of your week and have a great start to your summer.